back to Area 51 and a half. I'm your host, Ren, aka Technomage, aka Pyrelily, and today's episode is going to be a little different. Seeing that June is LGBTQ 2S+ Pride Month, I have kicked the cis men out of the tech booth, and I, your friendly neighborhood queer cryptid, will be doing the episode all alone. Seeing that it's Pride Month, we wanted to talk about something with queer pop culture, so it took us a little bit to figure out what the right topic would be, but we finally all settled on queer horror. So in the past, there's been a lot of use of queer characters in not so good light when it comes to horror. We're not going to be talking about those. In this episode, everything that we're talking about is going to be queers in a lighter setting, a less of the bury the gays trope and more of the just, we're regular people with our own issues. And if the queer person happens to be the killer in the movie, it's not because they're queer. They're just the killer. But before we dive into the episode, we're going to go over our socials because you want to know where to find us. So you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, Threads, all of those places with the Area 51H. And you can find us on YouTube and Facebook as Area 51 and 1/2. We also have a Patreon, which we will have a special episode from Snyderman 501 Nick Snyder about Clive Barker and the inspiration behind his books and stories located on there, because he went on this huge rant one day about it, and it was very, very interesting to me. And I'd like to share it with everybody else. So if you would like and you are able, please support us so that we can do this stuff more often. Working full-time jobs is very hard, and we just want to be able to entertain everyone with more content. And with all that stuff done, let's dive into the topic. So I've done quite a lot of research, and this may just be a lot of info dumping, but, we'll see how this episode goes. We're going to rewind the clock way, way back to some original books that had some of the queer horror elements in it, such as we have Camilla and Dracula. And we've kind of covered this on our vampire episode in the past, but I'm just going to touch on it very, very briefly. So in Camilla, obviously, we got some lesbians. Camilla has a big lesbian crush on Laura, who is like the main character of the book. There's not too much to say about Camilla that I don't think we've talked about most of it in our vampire episode. But it was a big mention of the sapphic love, and it had obviously lesbians in it. So that's why we are including it in the episode. But Dracula's an interesting one. So once again, as we mentioned in the vampire episode, Dracula was loosely based on Lord Ruthven from the 1819 short story The Vampire, which came out of the same competition that Frankenstein came out of. And Lord Ruthven is supposedly based on Lord Byron, who, if you know anything about Lord Byron, he puts the by in Byron. So queer people have latched onto the idea of vampires and Dracula due to the danger that vampires also live in. I found a piece from the website Sublime Horror written by Stefan Hoda, and I'm so sorry if I mispronounced that, but he says that, quote, Dracula reminds me to push back against institutions that seek to oppress us. He reminds me to resist the call of the norm and speak out for those who are other. He reminds me that I'm not alone, for the other is many, end quote. That really hit me because, look at it. For the longest time, we've kind of been on, queer people have been on the outs, just as Dracula was, the weird one, the one that you should be staying away from. Anyway, it was a cool connection for me. Bram Stoker himself, the man who wrote Dracula, was also a closeted gay man who pined for affections from his friends, his mentors, and possibly his lovers, Oscar Wilde and Walt Whitman. Which, okay, yeah, like why not just let it out in your writing? And to drive the fact home, the book uses kiss or kisses 42 times, lips was used 62 times, and voluptuous, mostly talking about Dracula's lips, was used 12 times. So, in my opinion, that's pretty queer. So, obviously, back when Dracula was written, queer people weren't allowed to be out and proud. So, a lot of the stuff just came from the writing. Um, Even to the point that Stoker was afraid that when Walt Whitman was getting tried for being a gay man, they used a lot of his writings as proof, and Stoker was a little nervous about his own writings. And oh no, would they be able to use that against me? But despite all of that and all that history tried to do, they could not get rid of us, and we are here. We are going to skip forward to, how about we go 1975? So obviously, the movies and TV shows that I picked are not the only examples of queer horror, but they're some of the more well-known ones and some of the ones that really stood out to me, in my opinion. So if you have any examples or movies or books or anything that you know of that I did not mention, please feel free to leave a comment on our Facebook or our Instagram or YouTube or wherever you possibly can. I'm on Instagram. You can come and call me out. Let's go. It'll be fun. So 1975, we're going to talk about Rocky Horror Picture Show. We're going to keep in mind that a lot of the terms that were used in the movie, especially the sweet transvestite from Transsexual Transylvania line, were used at the time. They're no longer used by a majority of the queer community. If you do use it and are reclaiming it, props to you. Very proud. But some people still find it offensive and don't like it being used. But we're going to talk about that because we can't talk about Rocky Horror without Tim Curry in fishnets singing the amazing song that is The Sweet Transvestite from Transsexual Transylvania. Not only does Rocky Horror have a lot of queer themes and characters in it, but it was also written by a queer man, Richard O'Brien. So O'Brien's a little bit of a touchy subject because he describes himself to be 70% male and 30% female, but from the articles and the research that I found, he's still against a lot of trans rights. I don't really want to dive into all of that because that's not what we're talking about. But when it comes to Rocky Horror, it was written in the 70s, and the one article that I have called, like, the 70s was kind of a quintessential queer renaissance because we just got out of the Stonewall riots, which was June and July of 1969. Queers were a lot more comfortable in the 70s than they were in the 80s and 90s because the AIDS epidemic hit at that point. And Rocky Horror had a lot of people questioning their identity, orientation, and lifestyles because not only does it have the idea of the cross-dressing, but it also has a polycule relationship, which it's not really like a bad polycule. Like, once again, this falls under the characters are a little odd, they're a little off, they're aliens. But having a polycule relationship is not what makes them bad. In this context, a polycule relationship is a connected network of people in a non-monogamous relationship. Other people may define it other ways, and as anybody in that lifestyle knows, it is kind of just an amoeba of terms, but that's what we're going to call it in this case. So we have Frankenfurter and Magenta, Columbia, Riff Raff, and then eventually Brad and Janet kind of joined in on the outsides. and Rocky, of course, they're all like in a big thing, amoeba of itself. So I read once that this was one of Tim Curry's first roles, and he had to deal with the fact that he had to dress in like corset, fishnets, drag, cross dressing, whatever term you want to use. Um, uh, yeah, that was his like first big role was Frankenfurter, which is very interesting because then I see him in so many other roles as time goes on. So, like, I, for example, knew him as Hexus from Fern Gully and Nigel Thornberry, but a lot of other people first saw him in Rocky Horror, or he was in Hunt for Red October, he was in The Shadow. Like, his list is a mile long, so I could sit here all day listing what he's been in. But that's always the joke on the internet is you know what type of person you're dealing with when you know what they know Tim Curry from. But anyway, the journey that Brad and Janet go through during the movie represents a common queer journey for a lot of us. Goes, discovery, shock, then you start questioning everything, you identify it and you can relate to it, you embrace a culture, you have the fear of the unknown, and then once you kind of embrace it and the quote unquote end of the journey, when you get there, you're knowing there's no going back. You've seen things, you can't go back to what you were before. There's no way. Well, that's what Brad and Janet have to deal with. And in the UK version, and probably a lot of other, like the new versions that have come out, there is a scene where they're leaving the wreckage of the house and they're singing a verse of Superheroes, which has them realize that they are confused about their new identities and sexualities, but they can't go back to their other lives and forget what happened in the house. And that hits home for a lot of queer people, that it's once you come out, you can't really go back in the closet. You can't make your life what it was before. No matter how hard you try, or no matter how hard Brad and Janet try, they can't erase what happened at the house. They know about these aliens. They know about Transylvania. They just have to deal with it now. And how are they going to cope with it the rest of the time? And then in 2016, they come out with a new version of Rocky Horror Picture Show, Let's Do the Time Warp Again, where Laverna Cox plays Frankenfurter and Adam Lambert plays Eddie. So those are two queer actors, or singer, and they played parts in the new recording, which was nice to actually see queer people embrace it and not just embrace it in like the outer world. This is like totally out there. And also having a trans woman play Frankenfurter, that was pretty cool, in my opinion. The next example of a queer horror would be the Scream series. So Kevin Williamson, who is the original screenwriter and creator, is openly gay, and he talked about Scream being coded in gay survival from the very beginning. Williamson related being a gay kid to being a final girl, and like she has to go through a lot of struggles to survive the movie. Well, gay kids, especially at the time that he was growing up, it was hard. They had to really go through a lot of hurdles. Williamson also confirmed more recently that Billy and Stu have a queer-coded relationship. This one was interesting. I had to go look up the case afterwards because I'm a big true crime fan. The two of them, their relationship was based on the infamous mass murders Nathan Freudenthal, Leopold Jr., and Richard Albert Loeb. I may have said those wrong. I apologize. They were in a gay relationship, and in May of 1924, they committed the perfect crime, as they called it. And yeah, you can look that up if you'd like for more details. But their act of murder also influenced Alfred Hitchcock's Rope, which in turn influenced the movie Murder by Numbers. But those are just some fun little facts, because, Williamson based Billy and Stu very lightly on the two men who were in a gay relationship. And he definitely says Billy and Stu got something going on. They're queer coded. There's no question. Scream 5, which I will admit, that was the first Scream movie I'd ever seen, was Scream 5. I have since gone back and watched the first one. But Scream 5 has a gay black character, which is rare on many fronts, because she also doesn't die first. She's queer, African American, and the lore master, and she survives throughout the entire movie, which was a really big twist. I remember watching it with my friends. I'm like, oh, guess who's gonna die first? And then she made it. That was amazing. And also, if you watch the opening scene, there's references to the Babadook, who definitely was a movie that queers have taken over and embraces their own, but was not designed to be ours. And has no queer people in it, but the Babadook is now a queer icon. And there's also many hints that the one killer might have been in love with the main character. I was watching it with my friends, and we're just like, oh God, oh, they're in love, aren't they? And, things went from there. But definitely one that we could consider a queer movie and has been embraced by the LGBTQ plus community for quite some time now. So you see, when I went through and did a lot of this research, I figured that Nick and John were going to be here with me and they'd be able to talk about the movies a little bit more and kind of give maybe some behind the scenes stuff. I'm still very new to horror movies. I have not seen all of the ones that they have seen. So for example, we're going to talk about Hellraiser real quick. I have not seen any of the other Hellraisers other than the brand new one that came out, as we called it in the past episode, Hellraiser Ooh Woo. So I apologize if I'm not doing a super deep dive into these movies or talking about a lot of the lore and the behind the scenes. But again, this is a Pride episode, so I'm trying to focus on more of the queer parts of things, not just the movie facts, because each of these movies could probably be their entire own episode, as we're all aware. So, as I said, Hellraiser. Hellraiser's next on the list. We have our big baddie, Pinhead. Pinhead is a creature that comes from the mind of Clive Barker. And, well, Pinhead is an ungendered being. Like, Pinhead can be whatever the hell he or she wants to be. So normally in the past, Pinhead was always played by Doug Bradley. But in the newest movie, we got a little bit of an actor change, and now Pinhead is played by Jamie Clayton, who is in fact a trans actress, which really, I assume, put everybody on their heads when they found out that Pinhead was going to be a girl. What? It was fabulous. I absolutely adored it. I enjoyed the look of Pinhead in the new movie. While having the black cloak and everything is traditional, and it has its own meaning to Clive Barker, having Pinhead and the other Cenobites look like they were flesh that was like tortured and twisted and carved into their own chaos, but like beautiful chaos as weird as that sounds. It was a very interesting twist. It definitely was new, and to have a new actress come in and play Pinhead, I think they did need that difference, because yeah, they could have put Pinhead again in the like all leather stuff, but I fear that like fans may not like that. They'd be like, oh, why are you just trying to copying what? So it kind of threw that out the window. And with Jamie, you redesigned it and put her in a totally different look, and it worked so well, in my opinion. Also, one of the big differences was the original movie came out in 1987. So a lot of the LGBTQ plus elements had to be in subtext. They weren't allowed to be just out in the open and displayed. But in 2022, it wasn't the case anymore. You didn't have to hide the subtext that Barker was trying to put into the movie in the past and into his books. You could just face down the taboos that were brought up and take them head on and put them in the movie and have people think about it without it being forbidden from a lot of the theaters that in 1987 it probably would have been banned in. My source for this was a article from pride.com, and the author says that the 2022 movie has more of a vibe that Barker might have wanted to have in it if he was allowed to include it during the era of the original movies. Because Clive Barker was a gay man. He lived in England, and like many authors, he wrote about what he knew. So for example, he was in a lot of the London leather bars. He spent a lot of his younger years in that scene, the more risque scene. So when it came to writing, he wrote about what he knew. He addressed his anxieties about the cost of coming out, which he then channeled into the Hellbound Heart, which is what all the Pinhead, the Hellraiser movies were based on. The design of the Cenobites from the beginning had leather and a lot of body modification, which is huge in the queer community. Constantly, like I've seen so many queer people with, the gauges and the ears stretched and the weird things just to stand out, because why not? The whole idea of Hellraiser and Pinhead challenged the cultural taboo about nudity. So when they were making the 2022 movie, one of the actors said that it was Adam Faison, said he didn't know whether or not he was allowed to look at Pinhead and the actors who did the Cenobites because they were all nude. And he says, quote, "They're so real that you're almost like, am I allowed to look at all of you?" End quote. Which, from what I've heard about Clive Barker, again, Nick went on this huge rant, and we're going to post a similar rant up on Patreon to explain it a little bit better. So check that out if you want a really deep dive into Clive Barker and the Hellraiser and the Rawhead Rex series and everything. That's what Clive Barker would have wanted. He wanted to challenge the taboos. In this case, the cultural taboo about nudity and the body modifications, and just, he wanted you to think. And after I watched the new Hellraiser movie, I literally had to sit there and think for a while, because I was like, oh yeah, making fun of it in the beginning, no problem, whatever. But by the end of it, I adore storylines that have to do with, okay, you made a wish. Well, you didn't put an end on that wish. You didn't say where you wanted it to end. But Pinhead determines when it ends. Pinhead will put you in the worst situation possible, and you have to deal with it because that's what you wished upon yourself. I really do need to go back and watch the other Hellraiser movies, because that kind of plot line, that kind of idea of, well, you have 3 wishes, but you weren't specific, really just gets me really excited. It's fun. It's cool. I enjoy the twists because there's so many options. But yeah, Hellraiser is obviously was written to be a queer storyline. Clive Barker was gay. You have a trans actress playing Pinhead. That's incredible. And was so nice to actually find out that a trans actress was doing it. And yeah, to have just a character, instead of being a male actor playing a male character and then having a female actress playing a female character, you have the trans actress. And I think that says a whole different thing about the movie and the decisions that were made. Because they could have just gone with a cis female actress and it would have worked out well too. But no, they chose a transgender actress. That is, in my opinion, really incredible, and another level of thought that they put into the movie that you may not have expected from just a horror movie. But moving from one 2022 film to another 2022 film. This one also gave me a lot of thought. The slasher film They Slash Them, which is obviously a joke on using they them pronouns. They them, they slash them, and then there's a joke about a non-binary serial killer and how do they kill people? They slash them. Haha, it's funny. Clever double entendre jokes. Ha ha ha. Anyway. um They Slash Them is a 2022 slasher film written and directed by John Logan, who also did Gladiator, Skyfall, and The Aviator, and produced by Blumhouse Productions, who I have started to absolutely love. The executive producer is Scott Turner Schofield, who I found out while doing research is a transgender human, which honestly explains a lot about the decisions that were put into this movie. So I use they them pronouns. I saw this on Netflix and I was like, ooh, they them, and there's Kevin Bacon in it. This looks like it would be fun. And it was fun, don't get me wrong. I absolutely adore it. But it hit home a few times. It hit pretty hard a few times. Luckily, I was watching it alone, so I could actually sit and process what I saw when I needed to. The movie premiered at Outfest Film Festival in July of 2022, which is an LGBTQ-oriented nonprofit in Los Angeles, which produces 2 film festivals, operates a streaming service, and runs educational services for filmmakers. In the movie stars a long list of queer actors, but the main characters are Theo Germain, who is non-binary, Quay Tan, who is trans, Darwin Del Fabro, who is also non-binary, and then there's Kevin Bacon, Anna Chomsky, and Carrie Preston, who all 3 of those people are cis, and I don't think they're queer, but I may be wrong. But when making a decision with the cast, they really tried hard to pick members of the LGBTQ plus community, because that was key to the movie, obviously. So all the characters are in a camp that ends up being a conversion camp. And some of them are there because they aren't happy with who they are. Some of them are there because they made deals with their family. Like there was one that was, oh, if I go to this thing, I can see my niece again. And it's a whole jumble. And like I was talking to some people about it, and someone said that, oh, there's lies from the very beginning. Because some of the people that were there were lying to themselves. Some were lying to everybody else. They were lying to society. Some, like one person's there for a newspaper article. It's like a lie upon a lie upon a lie upon a lie. Everybody's lying to everybody else or accusing people of lying when they're actually not. And it's one of those just twist and turn. Ooh, it's good. I really enjoy this movie. As I said before, picking members of the LGBTQ plus community was really key. So there is a quote from The Wrap where they had a interview with John Logan where it says, quote, "So it was finding actors who I felt had the strength for that and the honesty to embrace the message of the movie, which is very empowering. What's gratifying is, when I see those actors together, they're playing parts of themselves, and they really take pride in the movie because the movie is about celebrating their uniqueness and their queerness in a way." End quote. Both the writer and the producer aimed towards, quote, "flipping harmful Hollywood tropes at every level," end quote. For what they had to do in the movie and the topics that they covered, you could not have had this movie done right without the members of the LGBTQ plus community as the actors, because the feelings that they had behind it, and it's you could have faked it. I'm sure there are actors who could fake that feeling, but it wouldn't be right. Something would still be off about it. Another big factor with this movie is that it addressed the fact that LGBTQ plus actors they all report getting fewer jobs than closeted or straight cisgender actors. While they were doing auditions for this movie, the actors shared their true stories of what they had to go through and found out that many of the actors felt the need to hide their own identity while working on other projects. Like they couldn't be themselves for whatever reason. And that is really key. Again, there's a lot of queer people in the world that feel like they have to hide themselves, even just a little bit. Like at home, they can be themselves. At work, they may not be able to, or just the opposite. At work, they could be themselves. They could use whatever pronouns they want and dress how they want. But as soon as they get home, they're not allowed. It's tricky. And obviously, no two experiences are the same, but there are some trends that just go from one to another to another. So to have a movie that actually seeked out the actors that didn't get a lot of screen time and didn't get a lot of chance to do a movie was great because it gave them a chance to show their stuff, to work their chops, to show that, hey, just because I'm, for example, a non-binary actor doesn't mean I can't do certain roles. I don't have a big filmography, but that's not always from lack of trying. That's just not being able to land the roles because they have to hide part of themselves. And obviously, if you're hiding something, it's hard. It makes life more difficult. You don't get to express yourself as much. And as an actor or musician or whatever sort of art style you happen to do, if you have to hold part of you back, you don't do the best job that you possibly can. And also, as I said, a lot of the themes in the movie would not have hit home or hit the same way if you had someone who had never been through that experience. So, for example, the movie grapples a lot with gender identity, as well as other parts of the queer experience, such as stereotypical gender roles and if you can fit into it, and how a lot of queer people have to shape themselves into something that they may not want to do, or on the opposite side, shape themselves into someone who doesn't like what they enjoy. So there's the one scene where one of the girls is making a pie and she loves baking, but she said it's kind of taken as like, because she's a lesbian, because she's queer, she can't like baking. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. If you like baking, then you should be able to do it. There's nothing wrong with that, no matter what community you're a part of or not a part of. Another scene, Jordan, the main non-binary character, the counselor's talking to them and starts picking apart Jordan's sense of identity, which makes them doubt themselves. Like, oh, are you really who you say you are? Do you want to rethink that? So the horror within this movie is not only the killer in the camp, as they even make a joke. It's like Jason-esque. It's, waiting for Jason to come around a corner and slash him. But there's the horror of the killer in the camp, but also a horror with psychological warfare. The whole movie was inspired by the brutality experienced by queer teens in conversion camps. The movie really shows that sending someone to a conversion camp doesn't work. There's a lot of characters in it that went through the camp in the past and are now counselors. And being there, they may say that it worked, but again, it's a lie. They're lying to themselves. They're lying to the people. They're lying to society. I don't want to spoil anything. You should definitely watch this movie if you haven't seen it, because I don't know, it's a good slasher flick. It has a really good twist at the end, which I enjoyed. But it definitely shows that conversion camps don't work. They're a waste of time. Um, they should not exist. You're torturing teenagers or adults or whatever age ends up going to these camps. That shows examples of the forced marches, the sleep deprivation, psychological manipulation designed to enforce gender roles. And in the end, it was all aimed at making people realize that these things actually exist. They're out there. They are still used. There are legislations that are allowing them in countries that we thought wouldn't have allowed them. I first watched the movie and I thought, okay, well, this may not be as serious as what I think it's going to be. I thought it was going to be a little more of a, not lighthearted, but a little more casual. And then they really started getting into the nitty gritty of things. And like, I've heard of these camps. I have never been threatened with one. I have never thought about being put into one. But for the people who live that life where they are threatened, it must be terrifying. I definitely think that people should watch this movie, especially if you have someone who is queer in your family or your circle of friends, because it touches on a lot of stuff that we're scared of. We don't like to think about. We don't want to talk about, just because we're seen as different or wrong or broken by some people. It's hard to talk about this movie without John and Nick being here to also fill in some of their sides of it, because like I was sitting watching some of the scenes, and especially with Jordan and the counselor, and it made me horribly uncomfortable. And because it's all thoughts that I've had about myself and thoughts that I've gone through, and I don't know what other people took from it. I'm very curious to hear what cisgender or straight people have taken from this movie, other than the fact of, ooh, that's bad, let's not do that. Because sometimes it is really hard to describe the feelings that some of us go through, and it's difficult to put into words, and it's really hard to get people to understand why we are how we are, or what we do, or how we feel. But this movie did a better job than I think I definitely ever could, because I can write down feelings until the end of the earth. But they/them made it in a way that anybody could watch and accept, or at least watch and get an idea. Because in the end, the whole idea of accepting a queer person isn't about understanding. It isn't about putting yourself in our shoes or in our situation. It's just saying, okay, that's happening. What can I do to help? And how can I make it easier for you? But on the lighter side of things with this movie, there is a wonderful sing-along dance-ish sequence with a song from Pink. It's called Fucking Perfect. And it's when the camp kids are really just embracing themselves and realizing, you know what, we are perfect. It doesn't matter what these people say. We're great. We're awesome. And it was really cool. Like, I love that song. Loved it since it came out. So to see it in a movie, it was really cool. And it was a great little scene to kind of lighten the mood of the movie. And as we wrap up the movie section of this episode, we got some shout outs to Knock at the Cabin, Interview with a Vampire, Tammy and the T-Rex, and also Jennifer's Body. They're just some examples of movies with queer characters that like I didn't dive into them as much, but they were definitely on the list. And I'm sure you all have a lot more, so feel free to please comment below on whatever social media you happen to be on. Leave a comment of your own favorite LGBTQ plus movie or TV show or whatever. Yeah, we're always looking for more suggestions of things to watch. But scooting on, we're going to go to the lighter side of TV. How about we talk about Buffy the Vampire Slayer? So Buffy the Vampire Slayer was one of the first TV shows that had queer characters who were fully developed. They weren't just background characters. They weren't just like the one-off. Willow and Tara were main characters. They were a big part of the Scoobies throughout the entire series. I never watched Buffy growing up just because it was not on my radar of TV shows, but I know Nick and John both watched it when it was in its first run. But I did find an article from them.us. Yes, I told you, I did a lot of research, okay? I'm a nerd, and I wanted to get all this stuff right. But Johnny Atornio, the artistic director of the New York City Gay Men's Chorus, said in this article from them.us, quote, no high school queer misfit show had done what Buffy did and continues to do. Allow the adolescent queers to not only find one another and empower one another, but then to fight their demons inside the halls, outside the halls, and under the halls of their high school, end quote. Buffy obviously had a bunch of the outsiders, the weirdos, as the main characters. And then you got shows like Dawson's Creek, for example, which they both ran about the same time period. Buffy started in 97 and went to 2003. Dawson's Creek was 98 to 2003, about the same months and everything. But we had, Buffy the Vampire Slayer with the weirdos, and then Dawson Creek, which was also written by Kevin Williamson, aka the guy that did the Scream movies. They had the less weird kids, and they obviously in Dawson's Creek there were no hellmouths and demons and vampires involved, but it was a totally different set of kids, a whole different clique, group, whatever. So Buffy gave the weirdos someone to look forward to. It gave them a TV show that they could put themselves in, and they could imagine that they had a group of friends, in their high schools and stuff. Not that weirdos don't have friends in high school, but we were definitely not the main characters. I remember in high school I was definitely like a background NPC character. I was not the one to get an entire TV show based around my life in high school. It also, Buffy gave a place for like queer people to relate and to find comfort in. So again, this Johnny Tornino, sorry, he would watch it, like his mom would tape it while he was at choir practice, and he could pass because it was a TV show about a high school girl. So of course, what would a high school guy be allowed to watch but a TV show about a high school girl? But he compares it that the queers knew they were watching queer people. They were watching the misfits and the outsiders slay all the demons and dealing with the normal stuff of growing up and going through your crazy high school teen years, as well as, Buffy has vampires and monsters to fight, and her mom is just hoping that she was adjusting to a new town. Her mom had no idea, and she was just like, oh yeah, okay, I hope it all goes well. He states in the article that, quote, no high school show is doing that, at least not starring the misfits, the weirdos, the ones that are sometimes popular and sometimes not, sometimes invisible and sometimes the center of conflict and drama, end quote. So yeah, it may have just been two characters, but it gave queer people something to latch onto, and it gave the rest of the TV world the realization that literally, hey, we're here, we're queer, show us some representation in a good light. And that's kind of what Buffy did. as I said, I didn't watch it on its first go around, so I can't really say how it was to see the queer characters on TV in the 90s, but I'm sure it blew some socks off and it was definitely a new thing for a lot of people. But that brings us to a more recent show, one that I just finished and am absolutely in love with, The Fall of the House of Usher. That show has all queer characters pretty much. So we have Napoleon Leo Usher, who's bi, Perry Usher, who's queer and has no specific preference to partners. I don't want to put labels on any of these characters because it's up to them, obviously, but I would guess like pansexual, gender nonconforming of some sort for Perry. Victorine is a lesbian. Carmela is bisexual, who's also played by the bi icon Kate Siegel. The detective, Augustine, is gay. And Vera is... I have Vera down in my notes as anything and everything. She's a whole different situation. And honestly, I wrote these notes before I fully finished it. And then I finished it. And oh my God, can we just talk about that ending? And who is Vera? I want to know. I need more information on Vera. I just want a show on just her. I don't care about the rest of the ushers. Just give me a show on her. Ugh. Anyway. I said in the beginning that we're gonna try to avoid the like bury your gays trope, but in this case, they did bury the gays, but not because they're gay. Everybody died. Everyone in the Usher family died. So yeah, they all died. All the queer people died, but the entire family was gone by the end of it. It shows a lot of different people in the community under the umbrella. And, like, there's a throuple of some sort for business reasons, and then Perry has his own group that he kind of vibes with and lives with or has over at his house or whatever. And, like, I wouldn't really say any of the relationships are really healthy. But I don't know, it just kind of throws around. It's like, oh yeah, this person's queer. Oh, this person's queer. Yeah, whatever. Okay. Like, it's nothing. It's not a big deal. It's just part of the character. It's not like a shock factor. It's not like a, oh my God, everybody look at this. It's just part of them. And I really enjoy that. I personally think it's a very well-written show. How they work the titles of the Edgar Allan Poe stories into the episodes and like into the deaths was so creative. And it linked everything together pretty well. It was pretty satisfying. The ending, oh, yeah, I had to sit and stare at my screen for a little bit afterwards, but it was good. Oh my God, I so enjoyed the series. If you haven't seen it yet, you should see it. It's great, especially if you are a fan of Edgar Allan Poe's work. It's really good, and like, there were so many... I can go on about this for a while, and maybe I'll do it as my own little tiny episode thing. But anyway, it was so nice. It was cool, and it brought a lot of Edgar Allan Poe stories around that people may not have realized was Edgar Allan Poe. But anyway, it was a good show with lots of queer people in it, which was great and amazing. And we're gonna start wrapping the episode up real quick. But we have one more that we have to talk about. So this character I saw actually in a meme. And I saw it in a meme online where he says he's not a monster. Chucky. Chucky in the new TV show that he has. Chucky, I guess in Seed of Chucky, you find out that his child is gender fluid of some sort, gender fluid, gender queer, whichever. Anyway, Glenn and Glenda are the names that the character uses. And the one quote that stood out to me a lot was, and I found really funny, was, Like, the main character of the TV show, who is also gay, to throw another queer character out there, they're talking, and Chucky's like, I have a queer kid, right? And the character goes, you have a kid? Chucky says, gender fluid. Guy says, and you're cool with that? And Chucky's response is, I'm not a monster, Jake. To which then the main character, Jake, says, you are, you've killed all these people. What do you think? Why do you... And it goes on and goes on. And it's just, it was very entertaining. It's like, well, Chucky is a monster because he's killed people and is a living doll. But he's also like, of course I'm cool with my kid being gender fluid. Like, I'm not a bad person. I'm not a monster. And it's when I first saw that, it caught me off guard because I thought it was hilarious. But anyway, yeah, I haven't watched The Seed of Chucky. I probably should. I've seen the first Chucky movie. But The Seed of Chucky is a coming out story for Glenn and Glenda, which includes embracing their killer instincts and the gender fluidity that they have. And then eventually when that character is given a human body, they're played by a non-binary actor, which is pretty great too. So see, remember how I said that just because a queer person is a killer doesn't mean that they're a killer because they're queer. They're just a killer because they're a killer. And Chucky, Glenn, Glenda are a pretty good example of that. We've had a few good examples of how killers are just killers because they're killers, not because they're queer. Throughout this whole episode, it's been interesting diving into some of the newer horror, because as I said, a lot of the older stuff had some sort of queer, I don't even want to call it queer representation, but it had characters that could possibly be queer, but they were not done in good light. They were done as wrong, gross, evil, whatever. And that's not how it is. Queer people just want to survive. They just want to be here, just like everybody else. They just want to be left alone, to be honest. Like, we just want to be able to live our lives and suffer through life, just like everybody else. And that's all I have for you, aliens. I am Pyrelily, aka the Technomage, aka Ren, here for Area 51.5. Here's a reminder, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, Threads, any sort of social media with the Area 51H, and on YouTube and Facebook as the Area 51.5. We also have our Patreon, which will have a special episode from Nick about Clive Barker and his inspiration behind all of his movies and books and such on our Patreon. So if you would like and are able, please support us so that we can do this more often, because we just want to make really cool, entertaining things for everyone. And a good way to do that is supporting us through our Patreon and listening to all of our little tiny rambles that we will be putting out, because we enjoy rambling and I hope that you enjoy hearing it. And I hope this episode was entertaining and good and gave you some good information, or at least entertained you for the hour-ish that the episode has been. Just to let all of our aliens know, we will be taking the rest of the summer off, at least the month of July. We have Canada Day coming up, and a bunch of other cons, and a bunch of other life things. So we're going to take a month off. We will be back. We promise. Don't miss us too much. Continue to interact and leave comments and give us some suggestions of what you want to hear us talk about next season. I just have one final ending remark that came from the sublimehorror.com article by Stefan Hoda, and that is, quote, growing up gay meant that I had to come to terms with the reality that I might someday be harmed for being who I am. In a queer reading, my reading, the real horror of Dracula lies in the hands of those ready to do violence in the name of their bigoted convictions. The boogeyman isn't some vampire beckoning at the window, it's the angry men waiting to reduce your life to ashes via violence or legislation. End quote. Do with that quote what you will. But I'm Pyrelily, aka the Technomage, for Area 51.5, signing off, wishing you all a very happy Pride. Stay safe out there. Make sure you drink water because it's hot as hell out there. And remember, if you hear a whistle in the woods at night, no, you didn't. We'll see you in season 4, aliens.